First off, on behalf of the committee and myself, I just wanted to welcome you guys all to our very first episode of Virtual Fence Foundations. We're very excited to hear from Kaitlyn Dozler today. She's going to give us an overview of all the things virtual fencing and kind of help us learn a little bit more about how that technology works. She is the Virtual Fence Program Manager for the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture. I know she's going to talk a little bit about that program, so I'm not going to steal her thunder there. But what I will say is that she did both her bachelor's and her master's at the University of Nebraska. And during her master's, she actually had the chance to work with this virtual fence technology. And I'll give you a little spoiler of what she did. She looked at how virtual fence affects cattle stress right in that moment. And as a bit of a spoiler, she learned that it's not really that stressful for the animal. So we're excited to have her on board at the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, and we're excited to hear her give a little talk about what virtual fencing is and how the technology might be useful to you guys. So, Kaitlyn, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelby. Hi, everyone. Like Shelby said, my name is Kaitlyn Dozler. I am the Virtual Fence Program Manager at the Center for Regenerative Agriculture with the University of Missouri. And yeah, I'd just like to welcome you all to Virtual Fence Foundations today, and I'm excited to walk you through the basics of virtual fence. So to kind of get us started off today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an outline of kind of what you can expect. So we're going to start off by talking about the virtual fence program and kind of how it got started, what the program is looking to do for Missouri producers with bringing virtual fence into the state and all that kind of fun stuff. Then I'm going to introduce to you virtual fence. So go through the basics, what it is, how it works, all that kind of fun stuff. We're going to briefly talk about the 4 different virtual fence companies currently available to US consumers and kind of compare and contrast some differences between them. We're going to look at virtual fence utilization, not only in the state of Missouri, but in the US as a whole. So it's new technology. How can we as producers utilize it on the land for better soil health, better livestock management, all those kind of things. And then finally, the really big elephant in the room is always cost. So we're going to go over some really awesome cost share opportunities to really help producers bring down that initial investment cost and hopefully find a way to get the technology on their operations. And then we're going to round it out with questions. So as Shelby said, feel free to throw your questions in the chat as we go. If you have a really burning question, feel free to let them or tell them to let you unmute, and I'd be happy to answer them as best as I can. So without further ado, let's start talking about the virtual fence program at the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. So we feel very fortunate at the center. We were able to receive a $900,000 grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to start the virtual fencing program. The program started last October, so October of 2024, and that is when I joined the program as well. And the whole goal of the program is exactly what it sounds like, bringing virtual fence to Missouri producers. So the real goal behind the project is the center wanted to find a way to increase the adoption of cover crop grazing across Missouri, and we really wanted to introduce virtual fence as a tool to overcome some of the common grazing challenges you see when thinking about grazing cover crops. A lot of those being physical fence limitations and the really high labor that comes with cross fencing, not only cover crop fields, but also perennial pastures and different things like that. So our project has 5 main components. The first of those being, and probably my favorite part of the whole project, my Missouri producers. So we've selected 5 Missouri producers from across the state who have had previous experience grazing cover crops with their livestock. And so what we've done as the center is we've provided each of those 5 producers with 50 virtual fence collars apiece. And those producers are now implementing this technology on their own private operations for the next 3 years. And in return, they become my farm mentors. I tell my producers I want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're trying to get a really well-rounded knowledge. That way we can better educate the general public on maybe these are some hurdles you could potentially face when coming in to adopt a virtual fence. Or these are the impacts that it really had on my labor and how I was able to take a vacation this year because I wasn't worried about where my cattle were at on the pasture. I was able to see their location the whole time. And so building off of my farm mentors, that brings us to our second component of the project, which is our farmer to farmer education network. And so this is another really exciting component of the project. We want to start with our farm mentors and basically build out from there. hopefully building small communities of producers all around the state of Missouri that want to come together, whether that's at a coffee shop on a Monday morning or hopping on a Zoom call on a random Wednesday night, just to come and talk about what cover crops you're planting this fall, asking each other questions about, okay, when you implemented virtual fence, what company did you go with and why? Because we all know a farmer's favorite person to talk to is another farmer. So the whole goal behind that aspect of it is to really connect the farmer to farmer community across the state of Missouri. And finally, the last component is things like today, hosting educational events and field days all across the state of Missouri to give the public and other producers the opportunity to come see virtual fence working firsthand on these private farms and on university research farms. So that kind of brings me to this map. I just kind of wanted to give you guys a quick idea. So the red stars on the map indicate our private farm locations that are a part of our program. So these are our 5 producers that have received those 50 virtual fence collars to use them for the next 3 years. Now the blue stars indicate our university farm locations. So through our grant, we were able to purchase extra collars. And so we were very excited when we were able to distribute these collars to these different university farm locations, thus increasing the opportunities for more field days and the public to be able to go out and see the technology in action. Now, I know what you're thinking. If there's not a star very close to the county you're in or something like that, don't worry. The current plan is for the university farm locations to switch up throughout the project. So hopefully there'll be one closer to you in the coming future. So now that we've kind of talked about the center's project and kind of how we got here today, I really want to introduce you to the star of the show, which is virtual fence. So the biggest question I always get is, what is virtual fence? And the easiest way that I can describe virtual fence to producers is think about it like a shock collar for your dog, except on your cow or sheep or goat. Now, for a lot of people in the virtual fence industry that are on this call, they're probably like, but Kaitlyn, it's so much more complex than that. And I couldn't agree more. It is, but that's the easiest learning tactic to help people understand. So basically what virtual fence is, it's a new precision livestock technology that recently became available to producers in around 2021. What the technology is able to do is you can manage your livestock's location without the need of physical fencing. Each one of the collars utilizes GPS coordinates to create invisible fence boundaries that work as each collar gets one of the virtual fence collars around their neck. And then what the producer will do, they will go in on their app or their computer and set up those virtual fence boundaries. Those GPS coordinates will be relayed to the collars. And even though like us as the producers and the livestock won't be able to physically see a fence line, the collars will know that fence line is there. So say, as in this picture, your goat starts to approach that boundary. When they hit the first edge of that boundary, they're going to be met with a high-pitched like warning tone, like beep, 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 beep. And that's supposed to be their first sign to go back, turn around, you're not supposed to be over here. If they continue to move forward, that's when they're going to get hit with that electric shock. Now, for animal welfare standards, just so to kind of keep everybody aware, the shock that comes from a virtual fence collar is less than the shock that they would receive if they interacted with a typical single strand electric fence. And also the electric shock that they receive from the collars, they can only be shocked up to 3 times. And then that shock will cut out for animal safety reasons. So it is a very safe technology. Like Shelby said, I did my master's studying the stress of it with cattle, and we found no increase in stress with those animals. So I'm very confident to say that it is a safe technology to implement on your farm. So one of the fun things that I like to talk about is virtual fencing past to present. So this was the very first virtual fencing prototype that utilized GPS in the early 2000s. So I like to joke that this is a Franken cow, because can you imagine walking through your pasture and seeing a robotic arm attached to the side of your livestock's face? Well, thankfully, technology has made a lot of advancements since then. And the collars today, as you can see, this is a Vents collar in this photo. The collars are a lot more compact, and oftentimes the computer system that runs the whole collar can be found, like in this picture, in that little gray box hanging on the bottom of the cow's neck. Or in some of the collar designs, it's actually sitting up on the top. So a lot more sleeker, a lot more cleaner, and I can definitely tell a cow would rather have this hanging around their neck than the robotic arm across their face. So it's just really cool to see how far the technology has come. So, getting into the breakdown, how does it work? So, like I said, first things first, you're going to have to work with the companies to order your collars. And then once those collars come in, they're all going to need charged in some sort of way, whether that's inserting a battery, putting them on a charger, letting them sit out in the sun. And once those collars are all charged, each animal gets equipped with a virtual fence collar. And then you, the producer, would go in on either the app on your phone or the computer or something like that. And it's literally as simple as pointing and clicking. It'll pull up a map of your farm and you'll know the pasture that those livestock are going to be in. And you can point and click and draw the areas that you want your livestock either to stay in the inclusion zones or to stay out of with an exclusion zone. Now, just so everyone's aware, not all companies offer the exclusion zones, but they all allow the producers to create inclusion zones. So this is the area I want my livestock to stay in. And then if they try and leave that area, that's when they would receive those audio and electrical cues. So after you draw those maps on your phone, those GPS coordinates then get sent to the virtual fencing collars via either an on-the-ground base station. So 2 out of the 4 companies currently available on the market utilize these base stations, or some call them towers. And basically this acts as a relay point. You'll often find them on the tallest point in the landscape, like in the pasture or the grazing area. And they just act as that relay between the satellite and the collars. And then some of the collars, interestingly enough, don't require a base station whatsoever. They're completely cellular. So they talk to the cell phone towers in the area just like your phone would. And that's how they communicate and get those GPS coordinates. So after the virtual fence is established, the livestock are then met with stimuli if they try and exit the grazing area. So to kind of show you what this would look like, I have my little illustration here. So picture this is our cattle herd. I, as the producer, just went in and I drew my virtual fence. So say one of my cattle decides she wants to go and test the boundary. She's going to hit this boundary zone or the shock zone and be met with that audio cue, that high-pitched beep. And that is her first sign to then turn around and go back. Well, let's say another member of the herd saw it and decided she wanted to go even further. So she crossed that boundary zone, ignored that audio cue, and then she was met with that electrical cue. And that's her first, or that's her second sign. You ignore the audio cue, here's the electrical cue, turn around, go back to where you're supposed to go. Now, oftentimes I shouldn't say often, the majority of the time with proper training, this is the reaction you will see. Both the cattle will understand that they are not supposed to be in that area, and they will turn around and return to the grazing area without the need of a livestock dog to go and bring them back in, without the need of you, the producer, to go out there and round them back in. They'll simply turn around and go back in on their own without any physical fence in sight. So the really big thing that I like to emphasize when it comes to virtual fence is training. Training is the key component to making sure that your animals understand how to properly react to the system stimuli. You can't just throw the virtual fencing collars on your herd of livestock and throw them out in a pasture and expect them to understand what's going on, because you're just going to have a really big mess. So one of the cool things is each one of the virtual fencing companies really works with producers to come up with a customized training plan for their herd and like their different like operation size and things like that. But today I'm just going to kind of give you a basic one that I like to talk through producers with, and then I always say they can customize it from there for their own operation. So, like I said, virtual fence is really based on associative learning. So the very first thing that we want to do is to have all of our virtual fenced animals inside a very secure area with a very strong perimeter fence. This is really important when it comes to all aspects of virtual fencing, because virtual fencing is designed to act more as a cross fencing system than as a perimeter fencing system. I absolutely would not recommend that you send your cattle out on a cover crop field or on like to graze crop residue next to a busy road with only the virtual fencing system as your only form of fence. That is not recommended at all, because you're going to run into issues. I mean, it's technology. Something's going to fail at some point, probably, or you're going to have a really stubborn animal that day that's like, nope, I don't feel like staying inside the boundary today. And you don't want to be responsible for an accident or anything like that that would start to occur. So we always highly encourage producers have some sort of physical boundary around your livestock that are utilizing virtual fence. So, sorry, that was my little tangent. Back to the training. So when you put the animals inside this secure area for training, the first thing you want to do on day one of training is simply overlay your virtual fence around that outside perimeter. What this does is it gives those livestock the chance to interact with that sound first because they're not going to experience that shock yet because they can't get too far. So when your livestock walk up to the edges of those fence, they start to hear that sound. And then they see the physical fence in front of them and they start to associate the sound with a physical barrier. And then on day 2 of training, you simply move in one side of the virtual fence off of that physical fence. So now when the animals go to approach that side of the pen, they are met with the sound like they were the first day, but then they're also met with the electrical shock if they continue to try moving forward. And you basically continue this process all the way up until day 7 of training, when hopefully you can have about half the size of the original pen that you started with. And a really key point in this process is you as the producer being out there with your livestock during this time, because you want to be out there to make sure that they're actually learning how to respond to the sound correctly. A really good indicator that the livestock are properly trained on the system is when you can go out and see them properly respond to the sound and not need that shock for extra reinforcement. On average, people say training takes anywhere from 5 to 7 days. Some livestock, it might take longer. I've seen cows learn it within 3 hours. So it just depends on the livestock and all those different kinds of factors. I will say, don't be surprised if you see really strong reactions when they're exposed to the stimuli for the first time. In my master's program, I joked that my cows turned into rodeo stock the first time that they received that stimuli, but on average, it lasts 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and then they're right back to acting normal. So those are just some really key things to consider when it comes to the training side of it. Challenges, there's always going to be challenges when it comes to new technology or just new practices in general. One, virtual fence is not suitable for every operation. It is a high cost going in, so that's something producers, I always encourage them to think about. You don't need the technology to be the best farmer in your area or to keep up with your next door neighbor. Sometimes what you're doing now on your farm is exactly what you need to keep doing. So just really be cognizant of that and think about that when you're looking into making such a big investment. And then just the little things, collars will fall off, technical malfunctions, all that kind of stuff. This is a picture of a collar from my master's program, and I don't know what the cow decided to do that day, but she just decided to rip off the whole front of her collar. So you never know with livestock and technology what you're going to get. But I also have to put out the fact the technology is advancing all the time. The number of collars that typically fall off has drastically dropped from when the collars first came onto the market for US producers. The number of technical malfunctions has significantly dropped. The technology is updating and improving every single day, so I only see it going up from here. So really quick, diving into the 4 virtual fence companies. The first company that I want to talk quickly about is Vents. So Vents came on the US market in 2021. And the 3 big things that I kind of encourage my producers to look at when it comes to companies is 1, what kind of livestock do they make collars for? 2, if the system requires a tower or if it is cellular, because depending on how far spread out your livestock are or what your operation looks like, that could make a really big difference. And 3, one that a lot of people don't think about is actually the battery, because it seems like a very small detail. But if you're having to constantly switch out a battery or bringing in the cows to readjust collar sizes or something like that, that could be something that could turn into kind of a headache really fast. So the next 3 companies are all companies that we're utilizing for our virtual fence program. So the first one is No Fence. We're utilizing them for our sheep producers. And I would say my favorite thing about No Fence is the fact that they make collars for cattle, sheep, and goats. They're the only company currently available in the United States that makes sheep and goat collars. And their system is unique in the fact because they have that cellular-based system. So as long as your livestock are in areas with a good cellular signal, you don't have to worry about that tower on your property, and you just have to throw them on the animals, and you're good to go. Next up is Halter. Halter became commercially available in the US in 2024. They only make collars for cattle, and their system does require a tower, so that is something to think about. But some of the really cool aspects of Halter is they're integrating AI into their collars. So they want their collars to learn each individual cow and their tendencies. And so if one cow tries to get out more often than, say, the rest of the herd, she will actually be shocked quicker than every other cow in the herd typically would be, just because that AI starts to recognize that kind of behavior. So that's kind of a fun fact about them. And then last but certainly not least, we have Gallagher or eShepherd. One of my favorite things about Gallagher is they actually give producers the choice between the tower or the cellular-based system. So depending on your operation, you have a lot of flexibility with this company on either way that you want to go. And a really cool aspect about their collars and halters as well is they are solar charged. So once you put those collars on those cattle, unless we have some sort of technical malfunction or unless you have to adjust it for size, you should not have to take those collars off or mess with those collars again, which is kind of a fun fact. And both these companies also only make collars for cattle. So that is something to think about. Now, the big question that I always get goes along with cost. So I don't want to dive too deep into this, but the main things that I want to point out is there are kind of two different pricing systems. So companies like Halter and Vents, they work on an annual subscription basis. So you don't pay anything for the collars up front, but you have to think about the additional infrastructure fees of the tower because you're paying for that tower on your property, and that's a price per tower. And when it comes to paying for the collars, you are simply paying a one-time fee per year per head. And then you have companies like eShepherd and No Fence, where they give you the option of you purchase all of your collars upfront for a set price, and that can kind of vary sometimes depending on like the number of head you have or something like that. And then if you choose to go the cellular route, or you could still go the tower route with Gallagher, no matter which way you or either way you want. But with them, instead of paying a yearly fee, you pay a monthly fee. So just as a producer, it's important just to sit down, open your books and say, okay, like for our operation, this is what we can afford. We like the idea of paying yearly or paying monthly. And those are just kind of different things to kind of start considering. So going into the utilization side of things, the biggest thing that people think about when it comes to virtual fence is actually rotational grazing. So rotational grazing is typically when a pasture field is subdivided into small paddocks and the livestock can graze those paddocks in a timed sequence. A lot of advantages this can bring are things such as increased soil health, eliminating forage waste, and then quicker forage recovery and higher stocking density, and even better management of undesirable vegetation. Typically, when we start to see virtual fence, this is what we think of. We think of a cover crop field or a perennial pasture that's split into 4 different sections where you, the producer, would go out and physically move those cattle every single day. And in situations such as strip grazing, you as the producer might have to go out and move that physical fence multiple times a day just to get those cattle adequate forage. When we introduce virtual fence into the situation, that's when we can get this really high intensive regenerative grazing. You could be like this producer here in the top picture. He's standing on the edge of his field and he's moving his cattle simply by drawing different virtual fence boundaries on his phone. Or instead of standing on the edge of the field, you could be sitting on the beach on family vacation, checking on the location of your cattle. Or you could be sitting at your daughter's softball game during the summer. The possibilities are truly endless. And it's really exciting because instead of a conventional like square rotational grazing system, we can look at the picture on the right and we can put in new fence lines and adjust fence lines and adjust how many cattle are in each one of our different paddocks simply by clicking a few different buttons on our phone, and decrease the amount of time, decrease the amount of labor, and the amount of resources necessary to really have a high intensity grazing system. Whether that's on cover crops or perennial pasture, the opportunities are truly endless.
Kaitlyn, we got a question in the chat about
Yep.
we have goats and horses together. Would the cattle collars on no fence work for horses?
No. So unfortunately, right now, there is no virtual fence collar on the market for horses. So you could put it on your goats, but unfortunately not on your horses. So besides just the rotational grazing, what else can virtual fence do for your operation? So the really big thing that I like to point out is the real-time livestock location. So I could be sitting here on my phone, open up my virtual fencing app, and then boom, I can see exactly where my cows are in the center of Nebraska. in the middle of Nevada. Like, it's just kind of endless where you can be and open your phone and be able to see where those livestock are. Like, I know, like, out west on BLM land, they really appreciate this feature because sometimes it would take cowboys up to 5 days or even longer to go out and find herds out on those tens of thousands of acres. And in this point in case scenario, they can open the app, see exactly where that herd is, and they can go out and do that job in half the time. And it can be safer because they're not wandering around so many different acres looking for those different herds. And then we also have the aspect of the automated grazing boundaries. So say you want to be in your planter all day and you're not going to have time to go out there and properly like move your lines when you're trying to strip graze. So you as the producer with virtual fence can go in on your phone and set it up basically on a timer system. So at 8 a.m., this virtual fence line comes up. At 10 a.m., that one drops and a new one comes up, and it allows the cattle to creep forward. So you can literally set your paddocks to turn on and off at different points in the day, which can be really convenient because then you can set up a whole day's grazing plan and start it at 8 a.m. and not have to worry about it until 6 p.m. that night by the time you go to check on the herd. The other really important thing that I like to point out is virtual fence also does a lot in the realm of conservation. So protecting stream banks, or like in the cases of Missouri, a lot of streams are like really deep ditches that we struggle trying to fence across or fence around. With the idea of virtual fence, you're never going to have to worry about trying to get a fence across that creek again. In the cases of like wildlife, you won't have to worry about white-tailed deer running through your cross fences. Or out west, they have problems with elk and pronghorn getting tangled up in fences. With the elimination of fences on the landscape, those are problems that producers won't have to worry about. You can think about it for songbird habitat, again, like that stream bank restoration and those different aspects. Those are all really cool things. And then finally, the last three are cattle alert behaviors. So if your cow isn't moving as much as what is typically expected or what the collar typically records, you'll actually get a notification. And then you as the producer can go out and check on that animal and make sure that they're not lame or like stuck in a pond or anything like that. And there's actually been cases where those features have saved livestock's lives, which is really cool. And finally, the last one is just saving producers time and labor. You know, you can't, a fence can't be flooded away or taken away down a river if it's not there, or burned up in a wildfire or different things like that. So just allowing producers to be able to set up more fence boundaries without actually having to go out there and physically move the fence or put up the fence themselves, it can save you a lot of time and labor in that kind of aspect of things. So just kind of really quick, want to highlight some of the up and coming things that we're going to be talking about in the future webinars. So especially for my Missouri producers, we're really going to be going over strategically grazing cover crops, perennial pastures, row crop pastures, or row crop stubble, and that stockpiled fescue. So those are some really exciting things that we can look forward to in the coming episodes of this webinar. So finally, running into my cost share opportunities, this is where I'm really excited for producers because there's a lot more cost share opportunities coming up on the scene for producers when it comes to those wanting to put virtual fence on their properties. So I want to start this one off with groups to contact. So a lot of these in this slide, they don't offer like a specific program for virtual fence, but they're all different groups that I've had contact with where they're like, if you participate like in one of our other programs, or if you participate in one of our programs, or if you reach out to us, there may be a pool of money or a way we can help fund virtual fence, like on your property in a different way. And some of them, with all of the recent government shakeups, you might reach out and they might say, we're not able to at this time, but maybe check back in the future. These are just a variety of groups that I encourage my producers to contact because I always say you never know unless you ask. And the more people that start asking about it, that's a really good way to show these different groups that, hey, we have producers interested in this. Maybe we should start looking into a program to help them solve like some of these issues or bumps in the road that they're coming up with. So specific to virtual fence, these are 4 different programs that are either grants or that you can apply for to be a part of the program, and they will help cost share virtual fence. So Trust in Food, PERC, and the World Wildlife Fund Sustainable Ranching Initiative, all those are different private groups that you can go onto their websites and apply to be a part of their programs. and they will cost share virtual fencing with you, or they will provide you with a grant to put that on your property. So those are three different groups to really look into, especially for 2026 and those different grant years coming up. And the big one I'm excited to talk about, especially for my Missouri producers, is the NRCS EQIP program. So really great news for my Missouri producers. I have been talking with the NRCS state level people, and it's looking like we are good to go for the virtual fence to be implemented within the EQIP program for 2026. So don't go running to your county offices yet. A lot of the county offices, they might know it's coming, but they don't have a lot of information beyond that. So the state is hoping to get a lot more information out to those counties in the coming months. But definitely be ready for October to start applying for that program. It's looking like they're going to be able to provide some really awesome cost share opportunities with the initial startups to pay for collars, potential base stations, those first year subscription fees, and then continuing on if you are accepted to be part of the program to help pay the subscription fees up to 5 years of implementing that technology. So that's the one I'm really excited for, and I'll be sure to keep my Missouri producers up to date on it. Any out-of-state producers, be sure to talk to your state office officials, talk to your county level officials. The more you talk to people, they're going to know the more producers want the program and the more likely they are to implement it. And so finally, to kind of wrap things up, the key takeaways that I just really want to hit on, virtual fence really allows producers to strategically manage their property. And this is one of the only technologies where you can add fence and add rotations to your grazing system and things like that without actually having to be out there and physically moving the cattle themselves. Virtual fence, again, I like to reiterate, is designed to function more like a cross fencing system rather than that perimeter fence. So a physical boundary around the outside of that is always recommended. Virtual fence, again, not suitable for every operation. It's really up to you as the producer to analyze whether the technology is cost effective and could benefit your operation. And finally, the biggest message that I want to hit home with is virtual fencing should not replace physically checking on your cattle or monitoring your cover crops. It can be a valuable tool to really help you when you're in a time crunch or to be more energy efficient or labor efficient, but it should never replace that boots on the ground approach of being out there and being with your livestock. And so just kind of a really fun quote. This is from a livestock farmer in the UK, and he just talks about how when he implemented virtual fence, it gave him more time to focus on his family instead of having to constantly race the clock and put in more posts and more fencing and stuff like that. And so with that, I just kind of have one more little quote, and that is, technology will never replace great teachers, but technology in the hands of great teachers is transformational. And that's when I saw this quote, I instantly thought back to my producers, like how lucky I am to get to be here in the state of Missouri and work with producers that are so excited and so willing to implement this new technology. And when we get when we get this technology in the hands of people that want to encourage others to use it, teach other people about it, we can really make a difference for what we're doing in the state, whether that's cover crop grazing, perennial pasture grazing, all that kind of stuff. And so thank you, everyone, for listening today. I will be happy to take your questions. And yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope you join us next month.
All right. Thank you, Kaitlyn. We have a few questions in the chat. So the first one is, I have been told by Halter that they are not available in Missouri yet. Have you heard differently?
Yes. So there is currently 2 producers in the state that are getting halter equipment. One of the challenges with halter is they still are requiring herd sizes of 50 head or more. And I think as they become more established in the state and things like that, those numbers could potentially drop lower. But halter just came onto the US scene in 2024. And so they're currently trying to expand their footprint across the United States. So I'm very confident that they will be coming to Missouri a lot sooner than what a lot of people expect. And I know they just hired their first rep for the state of Missouri. So Missouri officially has a halter representative, which is really exciting. And then we will have halter callers for 2 of our private farms and then a couple of the university farms across the state.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question is, what if you already have a grazing system in place? Will that make you ineligible for NRCS cost share?
So this was a question that I had for them as well, and this is where it gets a little bit murky. So what I was told was basically you as the producer have to find a way to show them that by adding virtual fence onto your property, you would be enhancing it in some way, shape, or form, whether that's through conservation or new grazing efforts or things like that. So I don't think it would necessarily take you out of the running by any means. I think that would just have to be a conversation with like the local NRCS office.
And then as technology advances, how does the collars update?
So, a lot of the callers will receive remote updates. So, just like how they receive those GPS signals, they will send remote updates to the callers through like their servers and different things like that. And the exciting part of the future of the callers is I see a lot more animal health aspects coming. So, like heat detection, calving detection, sickness detection, all those kinds of different aspects. None of the companies have come out with that for their beef cattle versions of the collars yet, but I definitely see that as something coming in the future.
And then just to add on to that a little bit, have they come out with it for their dairy cattle?
Halter has, I'll call it a more advanced collar or maybe like a more advanced system on their dairy side of things. Because a lot of dairy farmers, especially in New Zealand, have very high, I don't want to call it high needs of data, or like they really like their data and like health screenings and different things like that. So the dairy side of the collars, at least on the halter side of things, I think might have some of the features. I'm not as sure. I'm more prone to the beef side, but I see it coming to the beef side soon.
Awesome. Can you have multiple paddocks going on the same system?
Yes. So, say you have a herd of 100 cows and you want to split those up into 10 little individual groups. You can have multiple virtual fences active with multiple herds active all over your property. And in some cases, I've even seen where a producer will take one paddock and will split the herd in half in the paddock. So they're all in the same area, but half the cows have access to one side, half the cows have access to the other side. And with the virtual fence, they don't cross over, and that's really cool.
Sorry, I had a question in the chat that said, can you please put up the virtual fence company list slide again? So I was
Oh,
going to do
yes.
that real quick while we keep answering these questions because you guys came up with a bunch of good questions. Can individuals do tours or discussions with university farms to get a taste of how the different systems work?
Yes, 100%. So in those cases, I would probably reach out to me or reach out to the university farms themselves. So none of the university farms have collars yet. We're in the process. All of the collars are ordered, and we're just now waiting for them to arrive to get put on the animals at the university farms. But yes, that is one of the really exciting aspects of it is they will be open to the public, so I can show the public around, or our farms can show the public around, and different aspects like that.
I know that I'm very excited for this to get started. And the other thing is those producers, each one of them, I believe you said has the different systems, right? So those three that you guys are using. So there will also be producers around the state that have Halter, Gallagher, and No
No offense.
Fence. No
Yep.
Offense, yes. That we would potentially get to talk to too, which is exciting.
Yes, and we'll have field days too. So that'll be fun.
Yes.
We'll get to go to the properties and host field days for people to come out and see it.
Yeah, so keep up with us and hopefully we have one of those come in the future. Do these collars work by shocking animals if they get too close to the boundary?
Yes, that is that second like notification point. So the first is that high pitched beep. And then if the animals don't respect that beep, then they are met with that shock. They can be shocked up to 3 times. And the cool part is, okay, say we have a cow that does get shocked 3 times and she continues out of the virtual fencing area. So the different things the farmers can do is they can simply redraw that virtual fence to put her back in, quote unquote. Or say with herd mentality, she decides to walk back to her herd. There is nothing stopping her from coming back in that virtual fence. So she can always rejoin the herd with none of those cues or anything like that. But then if she decides to try and leave again, that's when she's met with that sound and shock stimulus.
Yeah, I always think about it like a one-sided, one-way gate, right? They can always come back in, but they can't, once they go back in, they can't go back out.
Exactly.
We have a lot of questions about that. So like how big is the warning area from the boundary when they start getting shocked?
So one thing you have to realize with virtual fence is with all the technologies, there's going to be a little bit of drift. So, where exactly you set that virtual fence boundary on your computer, it might wave a little bit to the left or to the right once you're out there in the open field. And I can't think off the top of my head. Each company is different with like their sound boundary and their shock boundary. I would have to go and look up those exact numbers. But I want to say it's not that big. Like I'm not going to give exact numbers because I don't want to be off, but it's probably it's not that big from the time they hear the sound to the time they get the shock. It's the difference of probably a couple steps because it's meant to be once they hear that sound, they know to turn around.
So we have a very important question. Do you know if Halter's towers are portable for different pastures miles away, or are they stationary?
I know in some cases, like with the Vents towers, people were putting them on lawnmower trailers and moving them around from place to place. I know with halters, typically with their towers, they're mounted on some sort of like corner post in a pasture. I've heard of some producers that will take them down and move them from place to place. I don't know if it's highly recommended by halter per se, or if halter would tell you flat out not to do it. I have heard of people doing it. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do or it's the wrong thing to do, but I have heard of people doing it before.
And with vents specifically, it does void your warranty if you put
Yes.
it on something. So it's not something that companies are promoted, but tell them a little bit about the range that you might expect from a tower.
So with like the halter towers specifically, if the area was like perfectly flat per se, they average around 5,000 acres is what those towers can reach. And so obviously here in Missouri, we have trees, we have hills, different aspects like that. That's going to come into play and start to affect that. The good thing is say a cow gets down on the side of a hill or in some thick trees and that signal kind of gets disrupted, they will still be inside that virtual fence. So if they try and leave the virtual fence, they will still receive that shock or hear that sound if they try and leave. The only difference is that you, as the producer, will not be able to see an updated location of that animal, and you will not be able to like update what virtual fence is on their collar until they come back into either that cell phone signal or that tower signal. Does that kind of make sense, Shelby?
Makes perfect sense. And I think it's important to remember that if you get one of these products, these companies are going to work with you to figure out exactly what you need in terms of towers to make sure that you have good coverage because I'm sure they don't want you out there with an animal that gets out like Kaitlyn just described. So,
Exactly. They will work with you. They'll look at cellular maps if you go the cellular collar route. So that way you know if the cellular collars will even work on your property firsthand. And then if you work with any of the companies, you'll be sending in farm maps of the different areas that you plan to put the cattle on. And then that'll help them decide how many towers you'll potentially need, if cell coverage will work in your area, all that kind of stuff. You go through a whole onboarding and training process with the companies. That's really awesome. And they really get you up to date on how to work with their stuff.
So Jam wanted to clarify, they were asking, could they use, and they're specifically for goats with the no fence system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, could it work to set a GPS boundary to keep goats away from toxic mountain laurel? So I'm guessing a patch of, a toxic weed, or would the boundary be wide to work that way? So I'm guessing they're asking about, how big or small can that be?
A lot of the companies, you can make those inclusion areas pretty dang tiny, like per animal. So I would think if it's like a big patch on one side of the pasture, he should have no problem being able to draw out those virtual fence boundaries. And then just you talk to the individual companies and they'll give you like a small range of, okay, just in case, maybe leave like this much extra room on either side when you draw those virtual fence boundaries. And so in that case, you would just talk to the company and then you would just adjust for the small drift that they say might happen. And that's where you'd set that line. Is that helpful to them? They should
Yeah,
be
yeah,
able
I
to do
think.
it no problem.
Jam, would you like to unmute and further clarify?
I sent them a request, so if they want to, they can unmute now. Do the systems typically have equipment conditions viewable on the software/apps so that the farmer would know if the collar is low on battery or having some other malfunction?
Yes. So all of the collars will have on all of the apps you'll see like the no fence ones, for example, are a great example because those are batteries that you might potentially have to pull out and charge and switch out. It's right there in the app when you open it. You can see the charge on each one of those collars. So that way you know if it's going to be time to round up the herd and start switching out batteries or if they're going to be good to go for a few more months or things like that. So, yep, there's all sorts of that kind of information in the app where if something's malfunctioning or if there's a low battery or a warning or something like that, yep, you're able to see all that in the app.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
This is
Through loud
Jan.
and
Can you
clear.
hear me? Yeah. So my question with the mountain laurel, like, is it possible to like have the boundaries like inside the boundaries? Like, so like if you have a boundary, then you can fence off the mountain laurel like inside the boundary so they can't eat the mountain laurel while they're in the boundary. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes,
A
I
boundary within a
understand.
boundary?
Yep, I understand your question. So in those cases, they get to be a little more difficult because it's sometimes it's hard to draw an exclusion zone like so small that with that drift in the fence, there's a chance that they might be able to still get to it. If you draw that exclusion zone around that plant or plant's big enough, I would say you should be able to, no problem. So like a good example of that was people that do like civil pasture. They asked if they could like virtually fence off their trees. And we said like a single tree would be really difficult for the system to do because of the drift. But like if they did a row of trees or something like that, that was something that would probably be more doable.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and then can the audio signal be heard by the rancher?
Yes. And so that was always kind of a fun aspect when I was doing my grad school research. We had to count the number of shocks and sounds that went off on the collars as part of my research. So yes, you as the rancher, if you're standing close enough, you will be able to hear it. It's just kind of like that high-pitched beep tone.
Okay, I think we've worked through all of the questions in the chat. If anybody has any more questions, what we would be we got one more. Can the systems be adjusted to the sizes of the cattle, such as more shock for a large bull or less shock for a small calf? Since some systems say they are not usable on smaller animals, would they not be useful on a calf?
So putting virtual fence collars on calves is not recommended. On average, they like them to be around at least 500 pounds. I've heard of people potentially going a little bit smaller, but like the average size of a weaned calf, you could probably put a virtual fencing collar on, but it's not always recommended. You cannot go in and like add like a higher power for a bull per se or something like that. Currently, the only company that recommends putting their collars on bulls that I know of is eShepherd. They actually have like extra long chains and stuff like that to be able to put the collars on the bulls. Like Halter right now does not recommend putting their collars on the bulls. So it's kind of company dependent in that way. But overall, no, you cannot change that. That's like a standard setting from the companies.
And no, you might have said this, but I might have spaced. No companies currently put them on calves, so.
Yes, up to like a certain weight, up to like that 500-ish pound weight, then you can start putting them on calves. But typically, if a calf is still on its mom, it's not needed. That calf will stick around.
And then we had a question, how do you train the animals to the fence? So I didn't know if you wanted to briefly go back through your little diagram.
Yeah, I can briefly run back through it. So basically, the easiest way to train the livestock on the virtual fence is you want to have a strong, like physically fenced in area, and you have the cattle or your livestock within that area. Day one, you're going to overlay that virtual fence, and so the livestock can interact with that sound. And then day two, you're going to move in one side of that fence so the livestock start interacting with that shock and sound boundary both. And throughout this whole time, they're doing that associative learning and starting to associate that sound and that shock with physical boundaries that they're seeing around the perimeter of the pasture. And then by day 7, you're hopefully around about half the size of the original pen. And you, as the producer, it's really important that you're out there during this time observing the animals and understanding, okay, is my herd actually learning to respond to the sound correctly? Or are they still receiving a high number of shocks? Maybe I should add an extra couple days of training, all those kinds of aspects. And so it's just really important that you're out there as a producer during that time. Do you think that kind of quick overview of it works, Shelby?
I think it was good, as long as Sharon thinks it was good. And
Yeah,
then
Sharon, if you have more questions, I can answer them more in depth.
And you guys can feel free to contact anybody. Chrissy dropped Kaitlyn's information in the chat, but any one of us on the webinar team, we'd be happy to answer questions that you have. And there's Kaitlyn's information again.
Yeah.
The last question we're going to answer today is, what is the smallest size goat for the collars for no fence?
I have not heard of a goat that is too small for the collars. I would assume like newborn kids and stuff like that is probably too small. Probably almost around those same lines as like with cattle, as long as like the kid is weaned and those different aspects, I would say you're probably good to go. But I have not heard of like a minimum size requirement for any producer to put it on a goat yet.
All right. Thank you guys so much for attending. We are very happy that you guys came up with all of those really good questions. If you would like to continue this conversation, again, here's Kaitlyn's contact information. Feel free to email, call her. And we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. Next time, it's going to be on July 25th, and I'm going to be talking with you about some opportunities for cover crop grazing. So we're looking forward to that. And I want to thank the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, Missouri Fertilizer Control Board, MU Extension, and Missouri Cattlemen's for helping get this webinar started. So with that, thank you guys, and hopefully we will see you next time.